Yeah.
Oh, I just need one thing. This doesn't feel like my chair. No. Yeah, yeah. Okay, Council, if we could call the meeting to order. I just want to note for the record that Councillor Christian is coming. He'll just be a little late, but he'll be here plenty of time for our deliberations and decision making. We'll pass the meeting on to the clerk to open it up.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, under agenda item 1, approve agenda as presented. Motion by councillors Bezo, Allen, and Bruni that the agenda and addendum for the February 4th, 2019 budget meeting as presented be approved.
All in favor? Carried.
Council, I will note on the addendum there are a number of motions provided by Councillor Shoemaker. I think he's provided paper copies as well to you. There's also a piece of correspondence from the Fringe Festival. Under agenda item 2, declarations of pecuniary interest.
Councillor Nero.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On the 2019 budget, the capital request under fire services is a request to implement the phase 1 of the fire station location. I will not be taking part in that discussion. I had previously declared a conflict under the fire master plan from the Dillon Consulting Group, so I will stay out of that discussion only.
Thank you, Councillor Nero. Any other councillors? Seeing none.
Under agenda item 3, staff reports provided for the information of council. There are 3 reports. I should apologize, the third report does have a resolution with it, so we'll deal with that when we get to it. The first 2 reports, there's the budget input report from the CFO Treasurer, and as well from the CFO Treasurer, the OMPF allocation update. If you have any questions on those items, if you could please ask them now.
Seeing none.
And the last one under there is corporate membership fees 2019. As council will have noted, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities did add a fairly significant voluntary ask to their membership fee this year. By approving this following resolution, you will refer that particular ask to our supplementary budget request, and if you decide at a later point tonight to approve it, you can. This motion would then approve the corporate membership fees that are listed on that report. It'd be a motion by councillors Dufour and Bruni, resolved that the report of the Deputy City Clerk concerning 2019 corporate membership fees be received, and that the payment of the 2019 memberships in the amount of $37,834 be approved, with $6,200 to the Federation of Canadian Municipalities referred as a supplementary budget request.
All in favor? Motion's carried.
Hey, Council, this brings us to the budget deliberation section of the meeting. Our first item will be to approve a motion to go into Committee of the Whole to allow for more relaxed discussion. Motion by Councillors Dufour and Bruni. Resolved that City Council now proceed into Committee of the Whole to consider the following matter referred to it for consideration, 2019 budget.
All in favor? Carried.
Hey, Mr. Mayor, members of council, we'll now proceed with the service area and functional area presentations. Council, we did decide that Agenda Review Committee decided at a meeting this afternoon that We will entertain questions for each presentation following the presentation instead of having you try and save them until that particular matter was under consideration. So we will start with corporate services, and so I will give that presentation, and once I'm finished, you're welcome to ask me questions on that presentation, then we'll proceed with the other service areas. I should also note to you, Council, too, electronic voting, we will not be using it this meeting. You have to refer to a couple of agendas, and that makes it problematic for working with the electronic voting. So we will proceed again. We had a soft launch last meeting. We'll go with a slightly harder launch next meeting. And hopefully we've got all the bugs worked out. For the corporate services presentation, I've included the mayor and CAO's offices in our cost center as we have in previous years, just to make things a little easier. Corporate services, of course, aside from the mayor and CAO's offices, which we've added in, covers the finance area, the human resources area, and the clerk's department. Our 2019 operating budget summary shows not a huge amount of change other than for revenue. You'll notice there's a significant drop in revenue. That's attributed to the election. What we do is each year you allocate a certain amount of money into a reserve. And so for the first 3 years, that reserve builds up, and then in an election year, it's transferred over to us in revenue to pay for the election. So last year we had that revenue coming in. This year, of course, we don't. That's the significant change. Maintaining services, significant changes. As the CFO Treasurer noted in her introductory budget report, there are a number of things that are significant changes in order to maintain services at their level of last year. I did want to speak to some which tie into the corporate services area. One change was an increase in employee benefits of $668,500. That's made up of the following elements. There's a statutory element which we don't have a choice in. Those were increases passed from the federal government for CPP, for instance. And that's $260,500 of that. The extended benefits, $258,000. Normally, in a regular year, you would see a much larger amount, which would represent the increase to wages and benefits in a particular year. As you're aware, this is a year that we're going to be negotiating new contracts with all our bargaining units, so we don't have the wage figure in there because we can't budget for it. As you're aware, we've provided a contingency elsewhere in the budget that once the contracts are finalized, the money will flow out of that area. We are, however, able to budget for the benefit, so it shows up by itself. What you saw last year was a benefit and wages increase amount of $1.745 million. As a cost of maintaining services. So this year you're just seeing a figure without the wages component. As well, we have the retiree benefits area. Last year, Council will remember we had to provide an adjustment upwards of $175,000 to this area. This year we are again recommending a significant increase of $150,000. The major driver of that is an increased number of retirees. As you noted in the last meeting of the population projections, just how the baby boom is now moving into retirement, that's mirrored to a certain extent with our employee group. We've had a 24% increase in retirees over the last 5 years, and at first our budgeting wasn't catching up with that. It will be from this point forward. We are reviewing a number of things in the retiree benefits areas. Some work that's been done already is when we first started looking at this, there were a tremendous number of retiree benefit groups that had kind of grown over the years through different contract negotiations, especially in the area of police services. Just to get an administrative handle on these areas, we had to do a lot of work in the last 2 years to contract that number of groups, because we just have one full-time person that administrates all of this for us. So we've done that work. We are also looking at allocating our costs more appropriately to this area. One area that we don't have fully brought over yet, but we will implement this year, is making sure that all police retiree costs are allocated to the police cost center. In 2018, we had approximately $175,000 worth of costs, police retiree costs, that came under our budget areas, and which should be over in the police services area. It doesn't make a difference to what the taxpayer in the end is paying, but we feel it should be allocated to police services, because neither staff nor council has any say over those costs. So we will be implementing that this year. We are also continuing to look at the retiree benefits area. Just like all our benefits, it is an area that we do have to always review and make sure we are keeping benefit costs down as much as possible. Returning councillors will be aware that we have been working on taking our benefit provisions out to market in an RFP, and we will be doing that in the first half of this year. While that doesn't guarantee that we'll see savings, we will have gone out and tested the market and be able to ensure that we are getting the best costings available for that. The other significant change in maintaining services, WSIB, $200,000. That's an increase into the fire services EMS area for the PTSD presumptive cancer trend increase, the legislation that came down. In previous years, we were having to put a significant sum aside in previous budget to take care of any historical cases that came by. We explained at the time that we would have to provide another increase. It's still our best estimate, because we don't have a lot of trend data yet, but we will continue to work towards that. Corporate Services has one capital request. It is a significant one. We are looking at replacing our corporate telephone system at an estimated cost of $600,000. Our current system is very old. It's the best I could get from staff was it's over 30 years old. It still runs on copper wiring and over to the old switching station at the Bell establishment on Bruce Street. It's quite frankly beyond the end of its useful life, and more significantly, the contract for the service comes up this year in July. We generally sign 5-year contracts at the best available cost. Obviously, we need to look at a different system. Now, it is a system that costs us a fair amount of money to maintain each year. The servicing costs are about $180,000. We do expect to see some significant savings in that operating cost with the new system. However, we can't really quantify that until we RFP it, go out and get we are looking at all possible solutions, going either with the system we have now, going with a cell phone only system, going with VoIP, whatever's out there we will have a look at. Once we have gotten through that process and come back to you with an RFP to approve, we will detail what those savings will be. Operating increase requests. The first one stems out of our IT review digital strategy that Council received a presentation on at last meeting. And that would be to hire a Chief Technology Officer per that service review recommendation. For this year, we would look at a half-year budget ask of $75,000, knowing that we would have to come for the full year's funding for the 2020 budget. The next item is to hire a non-union support staff to address increasing volume and demand of return-to-work functions. As council is aware, we have one full-time staff that handles our return-to-work area. That area both addresses the claims that are made, both occupational and non-occupational claims to both under workman's WSIB and sick leave claims. They are, as well as dealing with the claims, they're also responsible for working with staff who are off to get them back to work and working with the departments to ensure that if there's accommodated work required or modified work required, whether it's with that department or with another area, that we do accommodate them and get them back to work as soon as possible. This area has seen a lot of increase in the work. The increase in work is not sustainable with just one FTE position. To actively manage the area and ensure we are getting our employees back to work as soon as possible, we do need the assistance of a non-union support staff, which would address that area and help us to maintain the level of service we have now. It is noted that the WSIP costs in particular have been trending up for a very long time. The costs are extensive, and we do see our work in the return to work area as something that pays off quite well as an investment to mitigating those WSIP costs. The remaining items under operating increase requests have come from council for the most part. The customer service training for frontline staff is a request that council asked to be put towards this year's budget. From staff's point of view, well, we would never turn down money for training because it is an essential element of developing our workforce. What we are recommending to you for this year is that we perhaps postpone this item to next year and allow us to bring a comprehensive training plan back to you that talks not just about customer service training, but about all our training needs. We do recognize that there is a need to have a comprehensive strategy as into how we're handling training. So we would respectfully say to you that we should come back to you in a future year with a comprehensive plan that gives you more to chew on when making that decision. The next item is increase to implement closed captioning at council meetings. This was another council resolution. After this resolution was passed, it was pointed out to us both by the public and council members that there is a type of closed captioning available when you view our council meeting videos, both in real time and when you get them when you're looking at them after the fact. We did discuss this with the Accessibility Advisory Committee and staff. What we have found out is that while that is a useful service, it doesn't meet the requirements or standards of the accessibility standards. We do feel that we need to review this further, and especially looking at the fact that we're going to be hopefully making investments in technology through the whole corporation in the next couple of years. We think this is an item that we can do some further review on and come back to you, knowing that there is at least a stopgap measure out there allowing people who are watching it on web stream, whether in real time or after the fact, that they can, with a setting, get a form of closed captioning. The last two items have to do with what we feel we would need to have to implement the changes we would need to make corporately to put ourselves in a position to challenge the city being bound to the laborers and carpenters unions. As council is aware, the province has brought out new legislation that on the face of it would seem to make that a much easier process. That legislation has not been passed yet. It's still in discussion, and we don't know what the final form of that is. We do think, though, that we need to see what that legislation is in final form before we would recommend proceeding with the items we've brought forward now. So that's where we would be on those 4 items. As well, you've made noted under the mayor's area, mayor and council's area, there are 3 items. I'm going to let the mayor speak directly to those items.
So we can disregard the first item, council. The increase in training budget is fine. It's not necessary. We were looking at cultural competency training because we did cultural competency training at the very beginning of this last term of mayor and council, and it was well received. So we were looking at doing that again in this term of council, but we think we could find a different way to do that. The $6,200 is not a request from my office. It was a request from Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and we just included it. Personally, I believe this is a pre-election request for advocacy. My feeling is our membership fee is to participate in the organization for advocacy. This is almost 60% of our membership fee, and it's not a request I support. I don't think we need to offer up more resources to have FCM advocate. So the only increase on this list that I'd be interested in pursuing is the increase as it relates to having some funds for the Balloting Advisory Committee. Talk a lot about our First Nations relationships and how important it is to move forward with them. We've never had any line item in our budget to do anything in that respect. So when I'm working on projects, have any earmarked resources to move projects forward, and I think this is a very reasonable amount to start, and I wanted to put it on this year's agenda. So that's the only ask from our budget that I'm interested in continuing with. So the other 2 you can just dismiss unless somebody wants to give the Federation of Canadian Municipalities more money, which I wouldn't support. Thank you.
Council, that ends the corporate services presentation. We're available for questions at this point.
Okay, we'll take Councillor Bruni, then Councillor Shoemaker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I guess while the question will be directed to Mr. White, regarding the corporate telephone system, you said it's 30 years old. Can it be stretched for another year or 2, possibly?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bruni, I've asked that of our staff. The problem we run into is we've been signing 5-year contracts with the provider because that gives us the most economical return. We don't feel we would get very good pricing on a 1 or a 2-year contract. As it is, we will probably have to do a certain amount of pay-as-you-go just in the transition phase to whatever we look at, but we do see it as a time now that we need to make the move. The system is at least 30 years old.
This didn't come to council last year, did it?
I think it's been flagged for council previously. Yeah.
Councillor Bruni, we always got that list of all of the asks, and we only really ever focused on the prioritized ones. It was lower down the priority list, but it wasn't something that we ever discussed, but I do believe it was on the spreadsheets. Yeah.
It's been climbing its way up, and it did make it to the prioritized.
It's been making its way to the top over the last number of years.
Okay. Regarding the 600,000, so we don't know exactly what the cost is going to be because you haven't tendered it out. So we don't know if it's a purchase or we don't know if it's a lease program.
I would believe that's correct.
We don't know what the final form of the program would be. The estimates that have been provided, manager of IT has looked at a range of different scenarios, and we have
the treasurer looks like she wants to say something here, so we'll turn her microphone on.
One key point that's been missed in the conversation is that there's an estimated savings of about $75,000 a year by replacing the telephone system. So it will, in itself, pay for itself over several years.
Well,
I think Councillor Bruni is more interested in where the 600 is going to come from.
Yeah, well, I mean, Mrs. Shell mentioned $75,000 savings, so it's already gone out. How would she know it's $75,000 savings?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bruni, the CFO is basing that on a range of savings that were possible, given the potential ways that the manager of IT looked out. He did some costing on some basic possibilities, whether we keep the old system but just upgrade parts of it, whether we go to a cell phone only system, whether we go to a hybrid system. And it certainly seems that $75,000 a year is probably a fair estimate. However, as I stated when I was making the presentation, we really won't know that until because there's such a range of potential solutions that you may have to do
So you might not have this implemented for 2019, do you think? If it was approved tonight?
We do feel we would have it implemented at some point in 2019, yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Regarding the non-union support staff for Return to Work program, is it possible for a third party to be hired, or would we, if we approve it, can we hire for a one-year contract to see how it will go?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bruni, there's two elements to your question. So first of all, can we hire a third party? The answer to that is you can hire a third party to do it. It's the feeling of staff that a third party doing it may not be as effective as having a staff person. That there's a lot of the position would be dealing with corporate staff throughout the organization. There's a benefit to having that happen with somebody who's an internal staff. A lot of the discussions that occur around return to work are of a sensitive nature, and if you're having a third party come in, there may be some barriers to having those sorts of discussions happen that could make it as an effective position as if it was an internal position. The other part of your question refers to can it be hired as a one-year contract? Again, that can happen. The only caveat I would put out to you is that we are having some challenges in attracting staff now and recruiting staff, and I think it may be more difficult to recruit someone for a one-year contract than recruiting somebody for a permanent position. I will ask the Director of Human Resources or the Return to Work Coordinator if they want to add anything to that.
Thank you, Mr. White. Through you, Mayor Provenzano or Councillor Bruni. Certainly we echo and agree with the comments from the corporate DCAO. In addition, with regards to the external third-party option, when we talk about what we're talking about as far as the challenges, a key component to mitigation of any of those claims is return to work and accommodation, and that's best done by the folks that know the positions, and those are typically held by the internal expertise of the various staff members. So we just offer that for consideration.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, Councillor Shoemaker. You're next on the list.
Yeah, thank you. Just picking up on a couple of Councillor Bruni's questions. With respect to the $600,000 estimate for the phone system, Mr. Clerk, you had said that our IT director has looked at a number of options. Does the $600,000 land sort of in the middle, or is it on the low range, the high range?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, the $600,000 estimate certainly covered the higher range. But we would not want to bring you an estimate and then have one of the solutions be significantly above that. So it is an estimate that will get you whichever one of the solutions proves to be the answer. Okay. We have an idea of what solution is probably going to be the best, but we aren't going to preclude receiving RFPs for all sorts of solutions. And if I recall correctly, I'll look at Frank, that estimate that you provided also included a 15 to 20% contingency in it. So we have tried to be conservative on it.
Okay. So it's possible, I suppose, that if it's not all used up, it ends up as surplus next year, correct?
That's correct.
Now, with respect to the question about hiring an internal staff or contracting some services for the return to work coordinator, if we approve the budget number tonight, can we still request that staff, delve into one of those two options, or delve into those two options in a bit more detail before, going ahead and proceeding to hire the position?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, certainly if Council approves it with that wish, we can bring back a further report. We can investigate it and bring back a further report that outlines the pros and cons, those approaches.
And just, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like that analysis hasn't been done yet.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, we've certainly discussed it as part of it. That's part of what my discussions were with Human Resources, because we were looking at all options. Certainly their feeling was that this is the most effective option to go with, but we can provide more data to that for you, for Council, if you wish. I don't know if the Director of Human Resources has anything to add on that.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Just to keep in mind that with any third-party relationship like we currently have with our non-AUC and our AUC sides of attendance and absence.
Mr. Mayor, just for the benefit of the general public, we speak a lot in acronyms.
Sorry.
I think we need to be sensitive to the fact that people following along might not know the acronyms.
Fair.
So AUC being occupational, non-AUC being non-occupational.
Correct.
So I'd ask all staff today, because people are watching, let's not use acronyms or short forms for words, so people that are watching understand what we're saying.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So just to reiterate, the workload in presenting and managing the claim, even to the point of a third party to challenge it or manage it, still falls on this individual. And that's where our concern for the volume, as Mr. White has already explained, that's our concern. It comes to a point where we're trying to maintain the current level of service, which has produced some of those estimates that you've already seen.
Okay, yeah, that answers it. Now, with respect to the $200,000 for PTSD presumptive cancer trend increase, you had said, Mr. White, that this was an estimate still, because we haven't determined a trend yet. There hasn't been enough data to determine a trend. I guess, is it a conservative estimate, or are we over budgeting on this to make sure that we've got it covered?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, I'll ask the Director of Human Resources and the CFO Treasurer if they can give any further detail to their discussions on developing the figure.
Either one of them.
Right. Councillor Shoemaker has asked about our $200,000 increase for the PTSD presumptive cancer. He's wondering, I think the answer really is that's our best estimate, but there's a caveat in that we don't have the data to really come up with something more refined.
Maybe for the benefit of the new councillors, there was a provincial change in legislation that had post-traumatic, presumptive, there's a presumption on post-traumatic stress disorder, which a year ago the corporation thought was going to have a increased cost effect for our first responders. That's where the presumption was. So we increased the budget last year by how much, Mr. Nero? Was it 300?
I think it was close to $300,000.
And at the time when, what was it? We increased the budget in 2017, 2 years ago, by $300,000?
For fire.
Yeah, for fire. For these claims in the one department. At the time, staff told us they thought they would have to increase that budget again. They are now. So I think the germane question is, you had 300 in the budget from 2 years ago. What's led you to conclude that you need another 200? So to Councillor Shoemaker's question, you must have enough data from 2017-18 going into 2019 that 300 isn't sufficient?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, just based on our experience alone, we realize that as far as trending and forecasting into the future, it becomes very difficult. We've asked those that are in the business in the actuarial sciences to predict these things, and they still don't have enough data to give us a comfort of where this is going. Certainly, the mayor is quite accurate in the presumptive being not only PTSD, but there's cancer legislation regarding certain emergency responders, in addition to chronic and acute stress, which has been added to a potentially compensable claim under Workplace Safety and Insurance Board jurisdiction. Is it over budgeting? To be honest, it's a challenge. I don't know, and we won't know probably for another 3 to 5 years until we get a really good handle on the trends across the province.
So did the 300 that was budgeted for last year, was that all exhausted?
Oh, yes.
Okay, if we have the microphone to the treasurer, please.
Just to provide an example of the average cost in the fire area, from 2015 to 2017, the average was $717,000. So hence why we've increased the budget now to around $700,000, which based on what the
yeah, I think
director said, it may not be enough still.
No, that's kind of the information council was looking for. So the average cost in the one department in fire services for these claims was $700,000 a year for 5 years? 3 years. For 3 years, for 3 years. So, right, we don't have $700,000 budgeted. We have, how much budgeted?
We will have $700,000 budgeted.
With this 200.
With this
but as of right
increase.
now, we have $500,000 budgeted.
Correct.
So your number did come from somewhere.
Correct.
So that's what Councillor Shoemaker was trying to get at. Well, how did you come up with this number? So there was obviously there was
through you, Mr. Mayor, again, based on the experiences and the fact that we predict at least 1 or 2 claims per year, which is a very conservative guesstimate. And again, I'll turn to the expert in the field. We've surveyed and discussed across the province with other folks attending various conferences and boards and discussion groups, and they're all in the same predicament. Your experience may be, our experience may be different than another municipalities, but based on our experience, plus 1 or 2 that we're pretty safe are going to occur, that's the basic analysis that we're currently undertaking.
Okay. That's fair. Those are all my questions.
Okay, so I have Councillor Gardy on I have you on. I have a list here.
Okay, so
each of you have to worry about which other one's
I'm
going
just looking out for my colleague. Back to the telephone system, if we could, Mr. Mayor, through you to Deputy CAO, Mr. White. Could you reiterate what the cost is to maintain it annually, currently?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Gardy, our actual cost for the past year, net of library and EDC who pay for their own portion of it, it was about $180,000.
Thank you. And through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. White and or to the manager of IT, when we're thinking about the IT, the potential of transforming IT and working with IT within the corporation, this 30-year-old phone system that runs on copper wire, does it have any kind of impact, or would it be even feasible to use in terms of a refresh of IT? Does it have any impact whatsoever? We have a 30-year phone system. We're going to potentially do a lot of work in and around IT in our building and our corporation. Does a 30-year phone system, like, is it compatible? Would it be feasible to use?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Gardy, if I get where you're going with the question, obviously with just like the rest of our IT systems, everything's in need of a serious upgrade. If your question is relating to could we lump a new phone system into some of the other endeavors we are going to be doing with IT over the coming years, I did ask that question. Right now, our current IT infrastructure couldn't handle some of the more modern solutions like a complete voice over internet protocol system. So we do need to look at solutions that
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. White, my question is simply, can you do one without the other, really? Can you, does it make much sense
You
at all?
can leave the current phone system in, but it's an antiquated phone system that works on copper, kind of a copper system, and
Yeah.
you can leave it there, but we'll pay another 180 grand this year to maintain it.
Thank you.
Councillor Hollingsworth?
Thank you. I just have a procedural question, clarification.
Sure.
We're going through this list procedurally. What's the next step if we disagree with, let's say, we don't want to have the telephone system? Do we get a new revised order?
No. So what we're gonna,
procedural.
What we're going to do, I'll kind of walk you through it, and if I'm wrong, the clerk will correct me. We're going through every presentation. At the end of that presentation, you're going to ask that staff leader about their budget and their budget requests and their operating or capital requests. When we're done all of the staff presentations, we have two things you'll see in your agenda. You have your capital budget and your operating budget. We'll deal with each of those things separately. Nothing's approved until we go through that process. So when we get to capital, if you want things removed from capital or put into capital, we'll have the discussion at that time. I'll take straw polls and we'll see where people are at. So right now, all you're doing is you're going to be asking the questions of the staff as they relate to their budgets. And then we'll move on. So if you want, let's say, the phone system is funded, right? So it's not something that's going in addition to the levy. But if you wanted to remove the phone system, that would be a conversation we had when we discussed all of the capital budget. Okay? Is that it, Councillor Hollingsworth? Councillor Nero?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. White, regarding the Chief Technology Officer request, $75,000, just to confirm for 2019, the ask would be $37,500 for this year?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Nero, no, the $75,000 represents a half-year ask.
Oh, that is the half year.
Yes.
Okay. And that same report, the review, I think identified 5 to 6 information technology technicians in addition to the Chief Technology Officer?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Nero, I wouldn't describe them as information technology technicians. There's a variety of roles that need to be added.
But there were 5 or 6, correct?
5 to 6 additional FTE.
Okay, and the
positions.
question, I guess the question would be that if we went ahead and approved the Chief Technology Officer, does that automatically commit us to hiring the 5 or 6 in 2020?
No.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Nero, it doesn't automatically make that happen, or, you don't necessarily have to follow through with the recommendations of the digital strategy. What we said at the time was that hiring a Chief Technology Officer is a first step to really look at what was produced by the strategy and give us guidance as to how we need to move forward with the strategy.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I have Councillor Dufour.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Director of HR Peter Nero. Does our Corporate Health and Safety Officer currently play a support role in any of our return to work programs?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Dufour. No, he's strictly responsible for corporate health and safety initiatives.
Okay.
He does serve as a fail-safe if something were to happen to our current return to work coordinator in a pinch. In HR, we have one dedicated person for each major function. So all 8 of us have one major role from the HR umbrella. We can cover off in a limited capacity for one another, but we're really not structured to do that on a long-term basis, no.
Okay.
Anything else, Councillor Dufour?
Nope, that's good.
Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. White, so I do have a couple questions, mostly just for clarification purposes, for savings. So when we're looking at the non-union support staff to address the increasing volume and demand of return to work functions, is it safe to assume that that's roughly $60,000 will be offset by the savings from the mitigated cost savings?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Scott. I think you've touched on it in the last part of your question. It doesn't necessarily mean a savings to budget. it certainly means a way to mitigate further costs. As we've noted, the WSIB area is an area of increased costs, and they've been quite substantial. This position would be of great assistance to our return to work coordinator in making sure we are only paying for the costs that we should be paying for.
Great. And the second question that I have is in regards to the phone system. So the current servicing costs are around $180,000 per year, correct?
Correct.
And if we move to the new one, do we have an estimated servicing cost of like annually for the new phone system? Just to kind of get a difference and see how much savings there would be.
I'm going to take a wild guess. It's around 115. Is that the case? Madam Treasurer,